on the next episode of Business Blind Spots Expose, the podcast. We've got people online. Tell us where you're coming in from in the chat window. But while you're doing that, let me tell you a little bit about what Business Blind Spots Expose, the podcast, is all about. As the CEO of Carmo, we're a company that builds culture, better culture for field service and trade companies, pest control, HVAC, plumbing, landscaping. And we use data to help them build a better culture because it creates greater accountability for employees. It creates greater productivity and profitability, sustainability of the business, a better customer experience. But while you can see some of the numbers and the data that tells you what's happening, gives you some of the ground truth as to what's happening in your business, if you can't see the blind spots, then you don't know where the story is going wrong. And that's the whole purpose of our podcast, is to learn lessons from people who've been there, experienced, who've gone through those blind spots and run into those blind spots like I have many times before in the past. They've learned from them, the lessons learned, and the stories that goes along with them. And today I've got someone who I've learned quite a bit from. I consider him an advisor and a mentor, and has helped a lot with my company in terms of getting to where we are. Mark Friedman. Mark, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Mark, the purpose of our podcast here is to share in the wealth of knowledge and experience that you've had in running companies before. When all the companies that you have run before, what is something that you've seen that the owners of the company didn't see that you wish they could have seen? Give me the first thing that comes to mind.
First thing would be companies that haven't listened to their employees for ideas that their employees have, where they think they know everything and they really don't know what the employees know, because the employees are the ones producing or dealing with customers. I think that's one of the big blind spots that companies run into.
So I want to pick that one apart a little bit, because I think there's a lot there. And that is, many times I've worked with companies, and the person who started the company was someone who was on the ground and moved their way up the ranks. Let's say it was a technician. They started out 15, 20 years ago. They've done it. But now they're in a leadership role, and they've got 5, 10, 15, 500 people working for them. And not listening to the employee is the most important thing for them to do. Did I get that right?
Oh, I don't know if that's the most important. You said, what was the first one that came to mind? I would tell you, I'm sure you'll go through an intro, but I wear a lot of hats and have worn a lot of hats. One of them is as an investor. And we deal with a lot of early stage companies through both RTP Capital and through the Launch Place, two organizations I'm associated with. And one of the things we look at all the time is the entrepreneur. Any investor would tell you, you bet on the entrepreneur. The idea is a great, important thing, obviously, but that entrepreneur, if it's a great entrepreneur and somebody could really lead, is going to take a mediocre idea and make it great, where a mediocre entrepreneur might take a great idea and make it mediocre. So it's a really important thing. But one of the pieces that we always look at is, what stage of the business can that entrepreneur be the right person until? So, for instance, you founded Carmo. If Carmo ended up being 10,000 employees and was ready to go public, is Vinay the right person to still be in that seat? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But the important thing is for Vinay to be able to look at that and say, I understand I may have this company outgrow me, or I may be able to grow with it. So those are really important things. So in the example you gave, where that founder started out, maybe if it's in the pest control business, he or she was a sole operator, had their own car, they were going out trying to scrounge up business, and they had success. They grew, and they got 10 cars, they got 20 cars, they got 50 cars, they have a whole fleet, and all of a sudden they have employees, and they have to deal with seasonal issues and benefit issues and everything else associated with that. Is that person still capable of being able to do that? And are they still in touch with the people that are in the field, that are doing the services, and what do they hear from the people in the field? And if you're busy running the business, can you keep up with other things that employees might be able to keep up with? So all things like that were behind what I had said.
Well, and this is why I was actually excited about when you said yes, you'd come on the podcast, because I think you do have a wealth of experience. Not only have you run a number of companies yourself, having been an investor in a number of high growth startups and some startups that may have gone to the moon, some that may not have. I think you've seen perspectives and gotten ideas on, or I'll say, and correct me if this is the right word, got a general sense of who is going to make it because of their attitude, as opposed to whether it's just a smart person or not. So it's not about the smarts; it's about how they approach the company and how they approach the employees in the market. Am I getting that right? Am I thinking about that the right way?
I think you are, although I'm not quite sure of the gist that you're getting to. So, even as somebody who's done this for a while, you still get surprised by things. So there could be somebody that you really have a lot of confidence in and faith in, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work, even if that person tries and does everything correctly. On the other hand, you might look at something where you just don't see where that's going to be for the future and how that's going to succeed. The story I always tell is that 15 years ago, if Google had presented as an angel investment, I don't know if we would have ever looked at Google. We would have said Yahoo is out there, Lycos is out there, Alta Vista is out there. Who would ever be able to see that Google would become this great and huge a company and such a success story? And maybe if you go back to what we had said originally, look at the entrepreneur and the person that's running the business. And there were some really bright and really energetic people that were there. So you might have taken a flyer that would have paid off very handsomely. But there are a lot of people who would have looked at that and said, you're going into a totally entrenched market where we know the internet back when Google was starting was 1/1000th the size, 1/1 millionth the size. I don't even know what the statistics are of where it is now. So you've got to be able to look at what's the growth of the industry, what's the growth of the platform somebody has.
So I think what I'm hearing is that there are a number of dimensions that the leader of a company has to look at in terms of running a company. One of the first things that you brought up, the first potential blind spot, is the listening to the employees. But there's another dimension, is just understanding where you stand in the market, and are you the right person in the right role, the right butts in the right seats on the bus, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a secret formula? I don't think I've ever heard of one. You have a much broader perspective than me. What are the things that you look for? Is it humility in the owner? Is it their ability to learn? What are some of the key characteristics and traits that you've seen?
It's a very interesting question. I don't know if there's any single set of traits. There are so many different characteristics that people have. You could be autocratic, you could be democratic, where you want all your people to make up a team and help you decide what those decisions should be. I think one of the things that you have to be able to have in almost all circumstances is some sense of balance. There is some level of being down in the weeds that every business owner has to get. But they have to be able to balance that between, what do I have to do to get the work done? Somebody has to do this, versus, do I raise money to bring in employees, or do I have enough customer revenue coming in to do this? And do I sacrifice my own earnings to bring in additional people? And it's probably the most important part of that is, how does that entrepreneur and whatever key members they have of their team concentrate on strategic macro items within a business versus being down in the weeds? So for instance, in Carmo, you as the CEO, you're doing a lot of the work. I know that. I talk to you all the time about the different coding and the different people that you're dealing with. But you also have to be able to have the time to look from a strategic and a vision point of view to say, this is an industry where we're going to focus on, and this is how I'm going to spend my time talking to the people in that industry, so I could have a keen focus on what is the data that they're looking for, and how can I make that data something, or give them data that they don't already have, which I think is what you've really been able to focus on in the last few years now.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone gave me an analogy of what I'm like, and they said, oh, Vinay, I think of you as an oak tree. You've got the branches above the ground that's broad and wide and shows. And then you've got the root system that is deep beneath the ground. What you need, Vinay, is the trunk that marries the branches to the trunk, and to the root system. And without that trunk, you're going to struggle. And I think that's highly personal for me in terms of kind of my personality and the way I run things. But that's not always the case. That's different per per founder, per business owner and leader. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, totally correct. Everybody has their own personality. I talk about culture an awful lot in businesses. And one of the things I try to stress is that there's no culture that's the correct culture. It's what's the culture that's most appropriate for that particular business at that particular time, that matches the employee and the entrepreneur rather, and the CEO, and what they want to be able to have that business. I think there are bad cultures that you want to avoid in a business. Clearly a corrupt business you want to avoid. Things like things that just aren't ethical, and things that maybe you're in industries you don't want to be a part of, whatever it might be. There are cultural things that sit there that you want to avoid. But the positive cultures, there are all kinds of positive cultures. And it's one of the things that makes small businesses really exciting, because you see so many different things and so much energy.
So one of the things that I've heard from people talking about culture as a topic is this idea that whether you believe there's a culture or not, there is a culture. It's just whether you have acknowledged it or not. Uh, Now, I think the next step beyond that is, or do you choose to create a culture that you want, or do you just accept the culture that there is? Have you seen any difference in the outcome of a company that controls that culture or intentionally builds that culture versus one that just kind of lets it happen?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I don't think it ever just happens.
Okay.
I think that culture is something that comes from the top down. Now, it's an entrepreneur is going to have a profound influence on what the culture of a business is. And for them to be comfortable in that business, that culture has to be a reflection of what they want to see. Now, sometimes you'll see a board give culture to a business if it gets to be a very dominant board. But I'll give you an example. We had purchased a business a number of years ago, and this was actually pre-internet, so you couldn't do nearly the level of diligence that you do today. And we had interviewed a bunch of the different employees when we were buying this business. It was up north, and once we bought it, we found all kinds of things that we had not discovered, because even though we were given access to the employees to talk to, they were concerned about their jobs. They didn't know if the acquisition would go through. They weren't free to talk to the new guys. Once we were the owners, it was a different story. And to say this was a cancerous culture is an understatement. And unfortunately, cancer in real life and in business spreads. This was a culture of dishonesty and not caring about a reputation. And we came about literally days from closing down this business before we started seeing that the new culture that we wanted to put in there, which was being proud of what you're doing, be honest. And it was in a part of the country where honesty is not always there. I won't say where it was because I don't want to offend anybody. But it really was a huge job to get that culture right. And we didn't think we could succeed in that business with the culture the way it was, nor did we think we'd be able to change it, because there's a lot of things that have to go on to change that culture once it's entrenched. So it's, you say sometimes it happens just by itself. Well, I think that's true. It does happen by itself. You don't sit there and say, you're going to have this or you're going to have this. And, one of the things that people have said to me before, when you start hearing our culture is to be ethical, well, you shouldn't have to say we're being ethical. You should live and breathe ethical if that's your culture. Our culture is customer first. That's something you want to say and make sure everybody hears it. So there are certain things that you do in bed, but there are others that are just the daily way of life that develops in the company.
Yeah, and let me give you more context to what I was saying there, because I think there's a question there for you, and that is there are people who accept, let's say, team meetings, right? We've got a team meeting. We're all meeting on Wednesday at 9 a.m., whatever that number is. And Johnny shows up at 9:01 the first week, and then 6 weeks later it's 9:10, and then after a while everyone else starts to say, "Hey, if Johnny can show up at 9:10, why do I need to show up at 9 o'clock? I don't need to hustle over here either." That acceptance of a behavior, that acknowledgement of that behavior becomes acceptance of that behavior, which sort of becomes that subversive culture that creates over time just because you accepted it. And it just happens. I think in that case, it's happened because you didn't hold people accountable to it, and maybe that's what it is. Is culture all about being able to hold people accountable, not only yourself as the founder, the one setting the pace, but holding everyone else accountable to that culture? Does that? sense?
I think you're looking at a microcosm of culture, not
Okay.
overall culture, but it's something that does influence all of culture. So I'm going to throw it back to you and give you a question with that. Is Johnny the CEO, a senior manager, or a staff employee?
Yeah, I mean, in the example, I was thinking he was a staff employee. But even if he was the CEO, if showing up like that, well, you can't hold others accountable if you don't bother to do it, right?
All right. So let's look at that situation. And one of the things I would say, I know you want to talk about data and where data can be used in a business, and you're certainly studying things like this in the data that you're gathering. So some of this is data, and some goes back to that listening to the employees. With Johnny coming in a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes late on a regular basis, right? If the rest of the people are there, that culture probably isn't that that everybody just kind of meanders in and does what they want. Those employees are probably looking at Johnny and saying, how come I'm working so hard? How come I get there on time? And how come nobody is doing anything about Johnny? And from the management point of view, they may be looking at Johnny and say, Johnny is my superstar salesman. I've got to be able to get away with this. But there are ways to work with that. And there's ways to sit down with Johnny and say, Johnny, you have an influence on other people. And you may not realize this, but what you're doing is making other people jealous, not feel good about themselves, not be held in high esteem because they come and they're treated the same way as this person that's seen as a loafer. So, it's a dual communication issue. And these are some of the tough leadership issues that CEOs face or senior managers face in a business all the time. And what's the typical reaction? I know you know this from the data you're gathering. The typical reaction is to look at it and ignore it. And one of the advantages of having that data in there is that you might be able to pick some of these things out and having empirical evidence that says, this is an issue. You may not realize it, or you may be trying to avoid it, but look, this is going to come back to haunt you if you don't do something. And it's having information that you could rely on is a critical piece to be able to make some of those hard decisions. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you, you should not rely purely on data because data can lie. Data can be misleading. Data can be gathered however the person that wants the data desires for it to be done. I can give you a story about that if you want. But having that data is certainly something that is valuable when you're making those decisions, and to even make yourself as the person that has to make those decisions feel better about that overall decision.
So tell me the story. I'm curious.
Right. We had another business. I spent the bulk of my career with a local business here in North Carolina. That was an entrepreneurial business, and we were involved in about 24 different businesses over the years in a wide variety of fields that we'd either started or acquired or partnered with others on. So one of those was actually a partnership that we did with the Gallup organization. And everybody knows Gallup from their polls, but they are actually one of the most pure research organizations on the planet. And when we first entered into the agreement with them, we were going to be doing syndicated financial services research. We were taking over a study that they used to do for years. And it was an enormous study. It was actually, again, pre-internet, and everything was printed, and it took up an entire bookshelf for all of the data that was produced. Just an enormous study of American uses of financial services. Before we would enter into that deal, they sat down with us and made us understand the ways that you could use market research data to either tell the truth or tell what you wanted to see. And they were so insistent on having partners that would only go to the truth because the Gallup name was golden. They didn't ever want that Gallup name to ever be hurt by anything. And it was something I really came to respect about that organization. So we had to understand all of these different ways that research is used and data is used to be able to get the answer you want, rather than using data to get the answer that's there. And it's a very important thing. You and I have had some conversations about this before with the data that you're gathering, and how you could be a data provider in two different camps. One is, I'm going to give a company data that they could use to go sell their products and do whatever they want, or I'm going to do the harder thing, which is really look and find the ways that I could use data to see what's actually going on.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. The analogy I use is Shakespeare has written a wonderful book with lots of text in it. Data is like the text. If you organize it the wrong way, it's not in the right sentences and not in the right paragraphs and chapters, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It can tell you anything that you want, but it's not the story that Shakespeare wrote, right? It's got to be looked at from the right perspective. And I think a lot of people say that data is the answer. Well, that's the furthest thing from the truth, right? It can prove anything that you want. Statistics lie, as they say. But if you understand what your culture is and what you're trying to get to, then you can start asking a better question. And I think that's really what data should get you to, is asking a better question. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think data can be an answer, very often an answer, but you also need to use your own judgment and your own intuition when looking at that. I think the thing that's possibly the most valuable thing about data is giving you a place where you can start. Back to what you just said, it allows you to ask questions. So if I see this data, it gives me a chance to start. Maybe I dig deeper into the data with that, but at least it gives me a start because it's pointing me in areas that might be concerned or areas where I excel and might be able to do more because of the how I excel in that area.
So when we look at companies, we tend to look at key performances. Did someone drive fast? Did they arrive on time? Did they leave late? Did they stay on site for too long? When trying to judge a human's performance, looking at how long they were on site is in my mind a little short-sighted. That's not enough of the story, and I think this is part of what you've said very early on. You need to talk to the employees. Back to the question again, right? You got to be able to ask the right question, not just what's playing in your head.
Yeah, you and I had this conversation when you were first starting these dashboards, and I'm glad you brought it up. I remember it very clearly. And we were looking at different instances of data. And one of the things you had said is a company can make more money if the business has shorter stays for whatever the service might be. But, a huge but, what if that business isn't liked anymore or it doesn't get repeat business because the service isn't doing the complete job? So how powerful is it if you could then combine what's the stay for somebody for X service versus what's the customer satisfaction from that person? And if you could find the trend that says, if this person is there for 30 minutes, let's just use any industry. We'll pick home cleaning, maid service.
Yep.
If somebody is there for 30 minutes, the satisfaction level is 1. Right. I may get 8 30-minute visits a day, but I've got really crummy satisfaction. So I'm going to have a lousy reputation and I'm not going to get repeat business. But if that person stays 47 minutes, all of a sudden my satisfaction ratings move up to a 4. Well, you're going to make more money on a book basis in the short run if it's a 30-minute appointment and you're charging the same thing. But look at how much repeat business you might get if that 47-minute appointment starts yielding additional business and additional returns because of the higher satisfaction rate.
Agreed. I think where I'll use the word short-sighted, where a lot of people tend to be short-sighted is in that they look at these individual performances as individual, not related to anything else. It's all those things together, like you're saying, the tie between all of them that makes all the difference in the world, because that's the behavior that you need, not just an individual performance. Did I hit that nail hard enough? kind of question.
Yeah.
Because I want sustainability of the business, sustainability of that customer relationship, and that revenue stream.
Yeah, and I think satisfaction studies are one of the misused and most important metrics that are out there. And the way it's misused, I was talking to somebody the other day and they were looking at a product and it had a bunch of 1s on Amazon. They said, I'm not going to buy it. But I happen to know the CEO of the company. And the reason they were getting 1s is that their product is not geared for everybody. And there are tough cases sometimes that this product won't solve. So if a parent buys this device for their kid and they're desperate for some solution because nothing else has worked and it doesn't work, they're just going to go out there and give a lousy rating to that product. Well, it's not really the audience it was intended for, and it's not the audience that really has those satisfaction ratings because the product does work for most people. Not everybody. Almost no product works for everybody. So I remember I used to run a series of conferences, which we were really proud of. They were great conferences. And the key question that we would ask was, would you recommend this conference to a colleague? And we almost always got 100% satisfaction rating, which made us feel great. I used to read every single one of these, and I would take it to heart when I got anything that was lower. We also couldn't use 100% satisfaction rating on our advertising because nobody believes that. And then you get people that are just going to give you a negative so they could see if you actually say 99% the next time. But so we would quote 99 or 98% based on what we were seeing. But I'll never forget, I used to read every single review that would come in. And especially the ones that said no, because I was the chairman of these programs. I used to see it as a failure, which was just silly. And I'll never forget looking at one of them. And the reason that they gave us a no, they wouldn't recommend it, was because we didn't cover this topic, this topic, this topic, or this topic. We published the agenda ahead of time. The topics that they had listed weren't anything we would ever cover in a conference like this. They basically went to the wrong conference. But we got a bad review because of their choice that was wrong. And, we went back, made sure our marketing materials said everything that it could to make sure they knew that it was the right conference. And we gave them a refund for the conference because we felt badly they didn't get what they wanted. But that bad review had nothing to do with what we did. And, I think you just learn that after a period of time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll be the first to admit I've been accused of having happy ears. I want to hear what I want to hear, not necessarily dig the layer below to get the real message from what is happening.
Well, let me add something to that, Nye. I'm the same way. I want everybody to be happy that I deal with. I don't want to give any impression otherwise. Anybody that knows me knows that's the case. But that person that wasn't that, one of two things could have happened. We could have just ignored it. And they probably would have told a bunch of other people, this is a crummy conference, don't ever go to it. Even though the reason that they gave it a lousy review had nothing to do with the conference itself, and most of the people they would have said that to would have enjoyed it. But being able to talk to that person and make them understand made them realize we're not just this big company that has an 800 number, but we're actually people and we actually care. And I could guarantee you, even though they had a lousy experience at that conference, because we spoke to them, they never said anything bad about that program. So it's a really important thing to be able to do. And that goes back to the data and being able to take the data and put it into usable ideas and usable actions.
So one of the things I try to talk about in terms of the data that we gather is there's this word empathy, right? And creating this empathetic data. I am starting to hear a lot of people use the word empathy, and I think it matters because when I hear the word empathy, I hear just what you've done, asking the question, saying, so not trying to convince them that you're thinking right so much as just asking truly to understand why did you think that way? Is there a lot of fluff around this word empathy? Does it matter? Do you think that shifts the way the conversation goes? Is it better to do that way?
Well, I think it's most people's ideal thing. They want people to be happy, no matter who you are. But you get to a point where you can't contact everybody. If you grow to scale, you're not going to be able to contact everybody. If you're an internet-based business, you may not be able to. So there's all kinds of things that people do now. There's reputation management online for businesses. There are ways to get favorable ratings and ways to try to avoid unfavorable ratings because of the way people look at purchasing products now, which is read what people see as independent reviews. It's a really important thing for a business to do. So I don't know if it's empathy. It goes back to the culture issue that was raised earlier, but it's I think it's a conscientious view that you have to pay to your business.
Yeah, and your point about going back to the very beginning, I mean, about that culture. If you've got someone in customer service, you've got someone in sales, you've got a technician who's out there, and someone says, I didn't like what you guys did last time, if they were to actually do it, because most people won't tell you when they dislike something. But if that technician or whoever's on site kind of leans in and says, "Can you help me understand why?" I'd love to understand. That could just potentially you could have gotten the wrong rating, or they could have gotten the wrong impression of the service because what they thought they ordered and what they actually got were two different things, but they didn't know the mismatch, like the conference. but just simply leaning in and asking the question and having a culture where people ask why could fundamentally shift the nature of that relationship.
Mhm.
To your point, right?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways of doing that. I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, we've had most of our groceries delivered rather than going into grocery stores, just our own little paranoia or whatever you want to call it. So generally, we get food from Whole Foods and it gets delivered. My wife loves Whole Foods. She's a huge Whole Foods fan. And in almost every order, somehow they put something that's not right in the bag. I don't know how it happens, but they've got a culture in that organization they've built, and it was before Amazon owned them, that if they make a mistake, they own up to it. And, they're not anything bad. It's just, somebody was shopping and put something in the wrong bag for you, and they're doing a lot of business. But on their app, you could just go on there and say, I got the wrong thing, or I wasn't satisfied with this, and you get a refund. I'm sure there is a chance, and I'm sure it happens. Some people abuse that. They find out about it, they abuse it. But that's a cost of doing business in Whole Foods' mind. And it goes with that culture. And it's part of the Amazon culture, too. I think almost everybody has had a product that they want to return to Amazon. It's one of the smoothest experiences you could ever have. They've made it even smoother now by having these hubs you could drop it off in different places. And sometimes Amazon says, okay, just keep the product. And I don't know if they have algorithms that say it's more expensive to ship it back, or they just give that latitude to their employees to make a decision. And it's part of that culture. You look at it from a different set of extremes, and this goes back to where does this play for different businesses and what's right. Neiman Marcus had a reputation for years that they would take anything back, and there were stories of how they took products back that weren't even sold from their store, and they knew it wasn't sold just because they were a high price provider and they wanted extreme customer satisfaction. Something like that, a policy like that, would never work in a place like Walmart. And it's not because Walmart has a worse culture. It's just a different culture. They're selling things at a much lower margin. They're not designed to operate like that. Now, I think Walmart does everything they can to make their customers satisfied as well. Not saying they don't. It's just a different way of looking at things.
And it goes back to that point. There's no right or wrong culture. It's just the culture that is right for you.
I think the more important thing is make sure the culture matches your business and what you're doing. One of the things, we're in such a heavily charged political environment today. One of the things that I've seen that's been very detrimental to some companies is letting their political culture be part of what goes on in the overall business. And there are all kinds of ways to look at that. You could look at businesses today that are being boycotted because of positioning. Disney got boycotted a number of years ago because of policies they had, and there's companies that get boycotted from the other side. But what I'm talking about is when you're just sitting down with somebody, trying to do business with them, that they're going to be a vendor or they might be a customer of yours, and you say something like, Donald Trump is the greatest president in the world. Right? I'm just bringing that up, not because I'm taking a side one way or the other, but it's about the most charged statement you can make today from either side.
Right.
Where does that belong in your business conversation? If somebody feels the way you do against or for somebody, that's fine. But why bring something like that in, and no matter how much you care about it? Because it could influence whether you do business or not. That's part of culture. And if you, as the head of an organization, are bringing those kind of things in, that's going to go on throughout the organization as well. Because again, that culture, it's what people see from the top. So it's there are all kinds of things that go along with that. And I'll give you an example of where I thought I played the right way. When Obamacare was being introduced, this goes back to the conferences that I talked about. I'll never forget, I always open my conferences up by saying, these are educational conferences. We don't take a position on things one way or the other. We're trying to present information that you could then go back and make decisions for your own business. So when Obamacare was first coming into play, I'll never forget, I had two people come up to me at the same conference. One of them said, Mark, you're full of beans. You just totally support everything that Obama does. And it doesn't matter what Obamacare is like. You love the guy. And I said, boy, I must have said something that I really didn't mean to say, because I never want to have that in a public forum. That same conference, somebody came up to me and said, why do you hate Obama so much? Obamacare actually has really good benefits to it. You should be objective about it. And I figure if I have two people tell me the exact opposite thing at the same program, I probably was in the middle and stayed that line of being educational.
I think that's a fair assessment.
It's actually a true story.
That's pretty funny. Uh, so blind. We've talked about it. Touched on a couple of blind spots. There's got to be balance between seeing the big picture strategy and also being in the weeds. We've talked about being intentional about your culture and creating it the way it fits your specific business, as opposed to just letting it kind of build by itself. What are other blind spots that you've seen in all the years that you've spent in and around running companies, investing in companies?
Oh, for some reason, I'm just reminded of this Billy Joel concert I went to a number of years ago at PNC Arena. And Billy Joel looked up at the scoreboard and said, "When did my dad get here?" I think I have gray hair. I've only been in business. I'd like to say I've only been in business for 3 years, but I've got the gray hair from all those blind spots. I wish that was true. So I feel like Billy Joel in that, now I've gray hair. I could sit there and talk about some of the things that I've seen. So there's a wide range of things. So let's just pick some out. Use of attorneys.
Okay.
I mean, everybody likes to pick on attorneys. I'm not going to pick on attorneys. I think they're a very important part of business, and I would throw this other professionals into the same category. One of the blind spots that entrepreneurs have, especially young entrepreneurs, is that when they hear something from an attorney, they don't have the experience always to go back and challenge that attorney. Sometimes attorneys make mistakes. Very often, attorneys will take the most conservative position for something because their role is to protect their client. And you have to remember as an entrepreneur that you have to do business. Sometimes the attorney is going to tell you, you might have this risk or this risk or this risk. Take that information and evaluate it versus the business opportunity you have. And this is in no way saying operate even in the gray or past the gray. It's take the advice of your attorneys and understand what that actually means. Spend the time to go and research it a little bit. It doesn't mean go read the tax code or read the legal doctrines, but do some research. Figure out where you might be able to change what you want to do so the attorney's red flag isn't set off anymore, and you might be able to do what you need to do. So it's a two-edged sword there. One, listen to your attorneys because they're giving you guidance for a reason. Don't do something stupid. I always go by the smell test. If it looks like, it smells like, it probably is. Don't do it. But at the same time, understand your business. Remember, your attorney doesn't know your business as well as you do. They know the law, and they're trying to give you that guidance. So listen to their guidance and then understand what the ramifications are for you and how you might be able to do something to stay within their guidelines.
Attorneys are a guardrail, not the road forward.
I think that's a good way to look at it. Yep. Yeah, and you definitely don't want to cross where that's a guardrail, and they say don't cross it.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
because you'll need another attorney at some point to bail you out, which is bad.
I feel like throughout the course of that conversation about the attorney and that blind spot that I should have been raising my hand the whole time, because I think I have definitely fallen into that trap myself many times.
We all have.
What else? What else do you see? I'm getting some good ones here that I'm starting to look at myself a little differently already.
Well, that's bad. Since I've been advising you, I should have been telling you these things. Right? It's my fault.
Well, I'm getting them conversation by conversation in the past. Now I'm getting them all in one conversation, which is better. This is faster for me.
All right, let's go back to the employees, and we talked a lot about that earlier on. One of the views that I've had, and I've been right about this most times, is that if an employee is going to get fired, forget that somebody's getting laid off because business is doing well, isn't doing well, and you have to make job cuts or things like that. Even in that circumstance, this usually holds. But one of the views I've had is that if you're doing your job as a manager right, and an employee needs to be fired, they should know they're getting fired before it ever happens. Because if you're not doing your job right, you haven't said anything to that employee. They don't know they're doing something wrong. And I think that's a business blind spot because those types of conversations are so hard. I can't tell you how many personnel reviews I've seen over the years that just says, Vinay, thank you for coming to work. You do a great job. Keep coming to work. And by the way, if you could, please Johnny, don't be the minute late to the meetings. Instead of sitting down and trying to do personnel development and coaching that person and helping the person, it's so much easier just to be non-confrontational and say, Vinay, you're a great guy. You're doing a good job. And then 3 months later say, Vinay, I'm sorry. I've got to get rid of you. You're just not doing a good job. Do the things that are fair to that person. Employees, your job for an employee has huge ramifications, not just on the disruption that you're going to have in your business from that employee being a bad employee there, or having a hole once you have to get rid of that employee that you have to fill. Remember, that employee is also a human being. Their self-esteem is hurt when they get fired or they don't do a good job and they haven't heard anything about it. They're going to look at it from their lens. There's always two ways of looking at things. They're going to tell everybody that this was a crummy company. They just fired me for no reason. Where, again, it's similar to that situation with the customer that wasn't happy. If you do your job communicating, you could avoid so many things. And communication, is, I think anybody that's been in business knows, is a really hard thing. It takes a long time. It takes much longer than you anticipate, because once you start communicating, it's a two-way process. It's not just me having a conversation and Vinay listening. It's me talking to Vinay and Vinay talking back. And that conversation where I might have 5 minutes of stuff to talk about could turn into an hour. And that other 55 minutes of conversation could be chock full of, these are the reasons I can't do my job. Do you know these roadblocks that sit here in this company for people to be able to do their job? And you might get enormous information out of that. So one of the blind spots is not wanting to face the realities that you have in your business and not wanting to face some of the hard things, especially personnel related things that managers, leaders of businesses need to be able to do.
I agree with that, and I like to say I preach some of that. I mean, in terms of studying the data and being able to get the data, setting clear expectations as to what is the goalpost. If they don't know what the goalpost is, how can they succeed? And so oftentimes, I mean, I just had a conversation with someone yesterday. They said, I onboarded a brand new employee. Then I found out 6 months later when I said, hey, how come you're not getting that? They said, well, this is what I was going north. And I was expecting them to go south, or whatever the case may be. If you're not setting the goalposts for them, you're not consistently telling them where those goalposts are, how can they get to the goalpost? I think that's kind of what I'm reading between the lines here and communicating that with them. I want you to show up early to the meetings or be on time to the meetings. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think especially today, probably more so today than I've ever seen in my career, there are a lot of generational differences within workforces. And some organizations can handle that really well. Some can't. I've seen organizations that have gone in and this is pre-pandemic. Everything has changed. It's kind of ironic that this will be the subject that I brought up. But I've seen people that are older managers go into an organization that had a young workforce and take away the ability to remotely work. People like the flexibility. They were all 20s and 30 somethings, and they would work from home periodically, whether it was because of childcare or they had things they needed to do, or they just didn't feel like coming into the office someday. And when you take that away, you've just changed that culture in the organization. Not only that, you've gotten some people that really have been alienated, or, one of the favorite words today, disenfranchised. Ironic, because everybody has to deal with remote workforces today, and we see how effective that can be. So, I try to understand if I walk by somebody's office, again, pre-pandemic, and I see an employee sitting there doing work and they've got a set of AirPods in and they're listening to music, and I couldn't sit there and do work listening to music. I've got to understand they're not me. Maybe that's the way they work, and they're just a younger employee or an older employee or whoever it might be. At the same time, I think younger generations need to understand that there is some level of experience that gets gained from being in business for a while or being out in the world for a while. But at the same time, the people who have been out in the world for a while have to understand that the younger generations might see things that you don't see the same way. I've looked at a couple of companies where they use, I'm very computer literate. I've been a computer person my whole life. I go into some organization, they use communication platforms that I've never even heard of, or if I've heard of them, I can't figure out what they are. They're a great way to communicate within these organizations, and they work. I can't go in there and say, send emails. I didn't realize emails were an old person's way of communicating. So
I'm starting to find that as I try to communicate with my kids that I can't use
Yeah.
that anymore.
I remember when emails were magical. You had these long addresses, and wow, you could send something to somebody and they get it immediately. That's it. And it's not going through a telephone line and a fax machine. How'd that happen? So, the world changes a lot, and you have to be able to adapt. And that's part of those generational differences, is being able to take advantage of the knowledge the newer generations have.
So when you're saying that, something that sort of came up in my mind as you're saying that and I don't feel like I hear this so much as of late, but I used to hear a lot. Oh, those millennials, and kind of you get the eye roll, and they're like, yeah, what a bunch of untitled whatever else. And my gut reaction to that has always been, gosh, what a missed opportunity when somebody says that. They haven't taken the time to truly understand from another perspective. Is that the way you see that as well?
Yeah, it's very funny you bring that up. I'll go back to my conferences. These conferences were in the retirement plan and healthcare space, where we educated employers on the best way to offer employee benefits to their employees. There was an enormous focus on communicating with millennials, whereas people got tired of hearing about millennials, because every communication session, it was, well, you can't send out something in the mail, and you can't send out an email, and you have to go through this channel and this social media, and this is the way to get through to the millennials. I opened up one conference. I probably got one of the biggest laughs that I've ever gotten in a program. The slide was, millennials are people too. And I realized from listening to some of the tapes from the programs, we were objectifying millennials. You were looking at them as, all right, this is this object that you have to be able to do this and this to. They're people. They respond to things the same way other people do. They just use different tools to get that response. And don't forget that they're people. So, I do think that there are stigmas and stereotypes that go with every generation. And, as generations age out, you start looking at them and saying, this was such a great time. These were such, caring people. How did we get this generation? I think you could go back through eternity and see those things.
So I've gotten so wrapped up in kind of the conversation here, I completely forgot to call out for people to chime in. And Matthew, thanks for chiming in. He said, younger people are motivated by different rewards too, more time off versus more money. It's a very interesting point. I mean, his point is, hey, look, what may have motivated you is not the motivation for someone else. Did you know that? It's kind of the question there.
Yeah, I think there are two questions there. One is, do you know it? And a lot of people don't. And two is, what do you do to address it? And even more people don't address it. Matthew, that we talked about that in our conferences all the time. There are different benefit programs. If you take the traditional benefit program that everybody was used to for a long period of time, you have your healthcare, you have your retirement plans, and you don't address some of the other things like pet insurance or additional time off, you're missing the boat with the people that are a sizable, maybe a majority of the workforce today. It's an enormous issue. I'm glad you brought that up. And it reminds me of a story. My nephew, who is now 26, he called me when he got his first job, and he was going to work for a high-tech company up in Boston. He said, Uncle Mark, this company offers unlimited vacation time. That's the greatest thing in the world. I could take as much time off as I want. And I said, Adam, you do realize that they care about you being in the office, and just because they say you can take as much time off as you want doesn't mean you really can. You have to plan it out and be judicious about it, because they're still going to evaluate you based on how you work and what you contribute to that company. So he understood that. It was just when he saw the benefit, it was like, wow, that's amazing.
So, Mark, I will tell you, I like to think myself is somewhat in touch. I think this is the sign that I am not, is that I think I am. As I've been evaluating social platforms to use and kind of reach the audience that I want to with our message, started looking at a bunch of things. Someone suggested, hey, why don't you look at TikTok, because there's so much velocity and momentum to TikTok. I got to tell you, the first time I looked into TikTok, you see me scrolling through this thing, and it's just like, I have no idea what's going on here. So I've started spending a little more time with it, just kind of to reset my perspective. But even for me, it's clearly there are things that I don't understand, and I don't know when I don't know.
Well, I will tell you, as the father of a teenager and a 20-year-old, there's a lot of TikTok around our house. And I could tell you, I don't think there was anything in current event. Well, I shouldn't say anything. There was lots of things in current events that have opened their eyes. But probably when TikTok was almost banned because of the supposed Chinese influence in it, boy, did that create an outrage.
Yeah, and then another one that's out there, Clubhouse. It's a very exclusive place. You can only get in if you've got an Apple based platform. And someone said to me, someone a little older than me said, "I don't get this. So basically, it's audio. Isn't that radio again?" I said, "Yeah, I think there's something there, but I think it's slightly different than it as well." And they said, it's just radio again. I don't need to listen to that stuff."
I'll have to ask my kids about that. They might be hiding that one from me.
So coming back to some blind spots, I heard about Billy Joel getting old. Attorneys are guardrails, not the road itself.
Getting old is definitely not a blind spot. We realize it.
And I like this one about if the employee is about to be fired, that should not come as a surprise. And I think, from my point of view in the data, it's also a lot easier to take an action if you want to, and hopefully that there's an opportunity to correct as opposed to take action. Is if they don't know how they're performing against your measuring stick, well, is that really even fair to try to fire them? I think, and that's part of your point, right? It should not come as a surprise to them at all. Mm-hmm. Hey, I want you to be A status, and you continue to perform at a C. I've told you, and I've told you, and I've told you 3 times. I haven't seen any change. Well, they should see that come in as well, or self-select themselves out. Is that the right way people should think about it? They communicate your intent, right?
I'll give you a little warning about that. A lot of businesses figure that Johnny, who you used before, is not happy. They're just going to quit. So they treat him more rotten, trying to induce them to quit. They may not quit because Johnny may not be employable or readily employable. And you're just letting this problem spread. And the problems are never isolated to just Johnny. They spread to other employees, and they make other employees malcontent because of the issues with Johnny. So their employee issues just need to be managed. Development issues are really important. Help your employees develop, help your employees grow. And there's a reality that some businesses may have employees that outgrow the business. That's not a bad thing. You're still helping that person, and you hate to lose that person. But understand, you can't give a career path to every person for their entire career. There's no business that can do that. So you will lose people. Lose them for the right reason, that they're outgrowing you, not for the wrong reason, that they hate you.
So I recently joined EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, because there's lots of training and lots of forum where you can talk to others about sort of the challenge you're having. And one of the people told me about a business owner down in Florida. She runs a bunch of schools, and she's got 250 employees. Most all of them are high school students, so a younger population. But when you walk into the place, the culture you can feel the culture as soon as you walk in. And the point was, well, you can do this with younger people. It's not just older folks. And they said the way she does this is she goes to every employee whenever they're going to have a conversation. She starts out with says, "I love you, full stop. But I have some expectations of you. And if you don't meet those expectations, I'll miss you." Mm-hmm. It seems to me like that's a very efficient way to say, hey, look, I've got some expectations and here's how I'm measuring you. If you don't want to measure up to that, that's perfectly okay. I still love you, but maybe you're just not the right fit for this place. And give them the opportunity to invite themselves in or invite themselves out. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, I think today's world, you have to be careful about the message. If you say, I love you, somebody could take that the wrong way. As good-hearted as it is, I hate to say that. I shouldn't say hate. Somebody will take that the wrong way. But it's a very tough time to know exactly what to say in very many circumstances. I remember a number of years ago, we had somebody who was working for us, who was a really great guy, but he was very touchy-feely. And actually, I was reminded of this when Biden was running on the campaign trail. Somebody accused him of being too huggy. Right? This person was really huggy. He didn't mean anything by it, but some people really took offense to it. And when you look at it through today's eyes, you see why somebody took offense to it. They really should have. And you have to be cognizant of that in business. And that's where employee surveys could come into play, especially if they're anonymized. Find out what people really think. One of the things that I've always believed is that employees know more than you give them credit for. They know what's going on in that business. But also, sometimes they misinterpret little snippets of information. That's why you go back to the communication aspects of it. If you think employees aren't going to know something, they probably do, but they may not know the right thing or the whole story of something. Now, I'll never forget, we had a rumor started in one of our companies that we were selling one of our businesses. And they even knew who we were selling it to. It was another business that we were associated with. I will tell you, we never had a single discussion about this. Somehow, this rumor got started in the company that they thought we were doing this. The kicker of it is we ended up selling the company to that company they thought we were going to sell it to, because when we heard the rumors, we said, why didn't we think of this? That's a fantastic idea.
That's really pretty funny. One of the things that I say to people is, as you start to talk with employees and try to build this culture, it makes a lot of sense to help employees build equity in the outcome as well. If they're invested in the outcome, their why is aligned with the company why. Gosh, I mean, you don't want your left wheel going left and your right wheel going right. If everyone's going in the same direction, isn't that a faster car?
We use a slightly different analogy, but the exact same thing. It was that if you have people in a rowboat and they're rowing opposite ways, you just go in circles. You all have to row the same way.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we've got just a couple more minutes, and I think I've jotted down a number of different things here. But I'd like to maybe kind of ask you, if, based on what you've seen in companies, based on the things that you've seen go right and wrong, if you were to give the first three things that you would give a business owner, a leader in a company, as the tip blind spots that they should look at, which ones would you say first?
Number one, make sure you're an expert in what you're trying to do.
Okay.
There are other people that could come along and understand the business better than you do that could take the business from you. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be the know-it-all of everything. You can get people in that are going to make you know that. But understand your business. Two, I would say understand where you want to take that business. One of the things that I've talked about a number of times in different settings is that in many ways, entrepreneurism has been a term that's been hijacked to some extent. And there are so many entrepreneurial opportunities today. When I got out of graduate school, I went to Duke for grad school. Out of 140 people, I was the only one that went to work for a small business. That is so different than it is today. There are so many opportunities in entrepreneurism and so many people that are going into entrepreneurism. But one of the things that's gotten, in my mind, mislabeled is that entrepreneurs are viewed as, or an entrepreneurial business is viewed as a high impact business that's going to take in investment dollars and sell itself in a relatively short period of time. And the reason I say the term has been hijacked, my dad was a dry cleaner. He spent his entire career operating a dry cleaning store. He loved his business. One of the hardest decisions I ever had to make was when he asked me if I wanted to go into that business with him. And for a variety of reasons, I stayed here in North Carolina instead of moving back home. But that's not part of the story. I viewed my dad as one of the most entrepreneurial people I knew. And this was before entrepreneur was even a word that was used regularly. Today, that business would be considered a lifestyle business. And I think it's unfair that there are lifestyle businesses that are out there. You're working in the pest control business. Many of those businesses are lifestyle businesses. And I would guarantee you some of the CEOs, some of the business people you've spoken to, you consider entrepreneurs, and those are entrepreneurial businesses. So there are lots of different areas. When I left the business in North Carolina that I talked about before and went to another one, I went to a big dental company that had practices in 39 different states. We had about 1,500 different employees. That was one of the most entrepreneurial businesses I've ever seen. It's not what we would typically think of in this area as an entrepreneurial business anymore, because it was it was a 40-year-old business, but they thought entrepreneurially, just like that dry cleaner or just like that pest control business might think. So, I don't even know which point I was on when I got off on this tangent, but it's an important thing to make sure that you stay in the lanes that you want to stay in. I'll never forget, I ran into somebody from American Underground a few months ago, just before the pandemic hit. And they had a young student from one of the local colleges that was with them. And he wanted to go into a brick and mortar business. And he talked to me about this whole notion of, am I an entrepreneur? And he was feeling badly about himself because he wasn't going to start a SaaS-based software company or whatever it might be that could be, $100 million in 3 years. Well, most of those businesses don't get to be $100 million in 3 years. A lot of them fail. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with going into that brick and mortar, retail, whatever type business it might be, if that's what your passion is. So I think that would be that. That's not a blind spot, but it would be something that I would add as a tangent to it. Pursue your passion. It's really important. You spend a lot of time at work. So the entrepreneur should pursue their passion.
So I wrote that one down as entrepreneurism has been hijacked by this what I'll call this sensational unicorn mentality. Everything's got to be $1 billion company, and everyone, you're not an entrepreneur unless you're talking about $1 billion valuation.
Yeah, and I think hijack is too much of a word, but I think it's the way when people think of entrepreneurs, that's the first thing that comes to their mind. And there are a lot of types of entrepreneurs that are out there.
And pursue the passion. I think is clear. I mean, because then you can see yourself through the hardship, because if you love it, gosh, you don't see the cuts, bruises, and scars. You see the goal that you're trying to get to, and cuts, bruises, and scars come with part of the journey.
Oh yeah. No matter what business you're going to be in, there's going to be some cuts and bruises and scars. And if you're doing the business that you like, you're going to smile and fight and find a way to make it work. Do everything you can to make it work. And as an investor, that's one of the keys that we look for in that entrepreneur. Are they going to do everything they can? Or when the going gets tough, are they just going to say, it didn't work. It wasn't my money anyway. That's not who you want to invest in.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing all these things. I what happens next is we take some of these and we get some little sound bites here. I think there's lots and lots of nuggets of wisdom here that I got, as I do with every single conversation I have with you. So thank you on two accounts. I'll be pushing this out to YouTube and all the little clips, and also as well as out to Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, so others can listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinay. That's very complimentary of you. I appreciate you saying that. This was a lot of fun to do. I hope the people in the audience enjoyed it. And if I could help, or people want to get in touch, so you can contact Vinay. He knows how to get me. So Thank you, and keep going with your business. You've got lots of promise.
Will do. Thanks, everyone.